As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the skies in shades of amber and violet, a young woman stepped off the day's last bus. Sophia, just 20 years old, adjusted the straps of her worn backpack and clutched two heavy grocery bags in her hands. Her petite figure trudged determinedly down the winding road toward the sleepy village of Pinewood, where her grandparents awaited her return. The weight of her burdens seemed to vanish in the urgency of her steps, but behind her unwavering resolve lay a life of sacrifices and secrets. The villagers often whispered about Sophia, the orphan girl who had grown into a graceful, resilient woman. She had returned every weekend for as long as anyone could remember, balancing a relentless work life in the city with caring for her ailing grandmother, Eleanor, and supporting her grandfather, Thomas, a retired carpenter. Yet this weekend was different. There was a spark in Sophia's eyes, a mix of excitement and trepidation, as if she were carrying more than just groceries in her hands. What was she rushing toward with such purpose? What had brought her back this time with an air of both hope and desperation? Sophia's life was defined by a cycle of giving, endlessly pouring her heart and energy into her family's well-being, leaving no room for her dreams. But this journey back to the village wasn't just about tending to her grandparents. It was about a decision that could change her life forever, a chance to step into the unknown and seize an opportunity that seemed almost too good to be true. What risks would she take to secure a future for her family? Would this new chapter bring the freedom she craved or plunge her into challenges she wasn't ready to face? These questions unravel a profoundly emotional journey filled with unexpected twists, unshakable loyalty, and the quiet strength of a young woman determined to rewrite her story. If you enjoy heartfelt tales of sacrifice, resilience, and transformation, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire, provoke thought, and touch the soul. Join us as we uncover Sophia's incredible path to hope and redemption. The narrow village road twisted ahead, lined with ancient oaks whose branches formed a shadowy canopy above. Sophia's arms burned from the weight of the bags, but she refused to stop. She could picture her grandparents' small, weathered house waiting for her, its warm glow piercing the growing darkness. It wasn't just the weight of the groceries that pressed on her. It was the weight of everything she had sacrificed for this life. Sophia had moved to the city at 18, determined to earn a better living to support her family. By day, she worked as an administrative assistant at a corporate office, a job she had landed after months of hustling and sending out applications. She took on freelance projects by night, editing documents, writing reports for college students, and translating contracts. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when her grandmother's health depended on expensive medications and her grandfather needed the peace of mind that their household was stable. She willingly made these sacrifices, but loneliness often crept into her thoughts. Her peers were building their lives, falling in love, or traveling the world. Sophia had no time for any of it. Her friends in the city often teased her, "Sophia, you're 20 going on 40. She would laugh it off, but deep down, their words stung. She wasn't ashamed of her choices. She loved her grandparents more than anything. But sometimes, she wished the world would stop asking so much of her. As she approached the house, Sophia noticed the soft golden glow of the porch light. Knowing her grandfather, Thomas, always left it on for her. She could already imagine the smell of her grandmother's soup simmering on the stove, even though Eleanor's health no longer allowed her to do much cooking. It was a small comfort after another grueling week in the city. But this wasn't just any weekend. This time, Sophia carried more than groceries. She took a decision that might finally change everything. For weeks, she had been quietly researching a rare opportunity, one that could potentially secure the future she had been working so hard to build. It would take her away from the village, into the unknown, and require her to take risks she'd never faced before. It thrilled her as much as it terrified her. Would her grandparents understand if she told them? Could she even go through with it? Her thoughts were interrupted by the familiar creak of the front door. "Sophia, my girl." Thomas's deep voice broke through the stillness of the evening. His face lit up as he stepped onto the porch. "Eleanor, she's here," he called back inside. Sophia dropped the bags on the porch and threw herself into her grandfather's arms. "It's so good to be home," she said, and for a moment, She allowed herself to forget the decision weighing on her heart. Inside the house, Eleanor sat in her favorite armchair by the fireplace, her frail hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. Her once bright eyes, now dulled by age and illness, sparkled as Sophia entered the room. "You're here, my darling," she said softly, her voice carrying the warmth of unconditional love. "I brought everything you asked for, Grandma," Sophia said, placing the bags on the kitchen counter. "And a few surprises, too." She pulled out a box of imported herbal tea, Eleanor's favorite, and a jar of honey from the city's farmer's market. Eleanor's eyes lit up with delight. "Always spoiling us," Thomas said with a chuckle as he took the groceries to unpack. "You should save your money, Sophia. We're not that old. We can manage." "You say that every time, Grandpa," Sophia replied, shaking her head with a smile. "But we all know you let Grandma do too much. I'll handle everything this weekend." As they settled down for dinner, the conversation flowed easily. Thomas shared stories from his days as a carpenter. Eleanor recounted tales from the village, a neighbor's runaway goat, the new family moving into the old Miller house, and the upcoming church fundraiser. It was in these moments, surrounded by the people who loved her most, that Sophia felt whole. But as the night wore on and her grandparents retired to bed, Sophia sat by the dying embers of the fireplace, her thoughts returning to the decision she had to make. Earlier that week, her childhood friend Luke Hayes had called her, practically bursting with excitement. He had stumbled upon an announcement about a privately funded expedition. A wealthy philanthropist was seeking a team for a high-risk, high-reward exploration in a remote wilderness. The pay was astronomical, enough to cover not just her grandmother's medications, but also her grandfather's overdue property taxes and the repairs their house so desperately needed. "Come on, Sophia," Luke had urged. "You're perfect for this. You've got the stamina, the brains, and the guts. They're looking for people just like you." It wasn't the adventure that appealed to Sophia. It was the chance to finally ease her family's struggles. But the risks were enormous. The expedition would take her deep into uncharted territory, far from the safety of home. And if something went wrong, if the payment didn't come through or the organizers turned out to be untrustworthy, she would lose everything. Sophia sighed heavily, running her fingers through her hair. She had spent years being the rock her grandparents leaned on. Could she risk leaving them now, even if it meant securing their future? The thought of telling them made her stomach twist. She knew her grandparents would try to dissuade her, not because they didn't believe in her, but because they would worry endlessly. "Am I doing the right thing?" she whispered to the empty room. The soft creak of the floorboards startled her. She turned to see her grandfather standing in the doorway, his face lined with concern. "What's on your mind, Sophia?" he asked, his voice gentle. For a moment, she hesitated. But then she looked into his kind, weathered face and knew she couldn't keep this from him. "Grandpa," she began, "I think I've found a way to take care of everything, but it's risky." Thomas sat beside her, his expression serious. "Tell me everything, Sophia," he said, "and we'll figure it out together." The night stretched as Sophia shared her plans with her grandfather, the firelight flickering between them. Though the path ahead was uncertain, a small glimmer of hope was in her heart. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life where her family was free from struggle, where she wasn't just surviving, but thriving. The following day, the golden rays of dawn filtered through the lace curtains of the tiny house. Sophia stirred from a restless sleep, her conversation with her grandfather still heavy on her mind. Thomas had listened patiently the night before, his wise eyes never leaving hers. He hadn't tried to dissuade her. He rarely did. Instead, he'd asked her a straightforward question. "What does your heart tell you, Sophia?" As she prepared breakfast, Sophia's thoughts wandered back to his words. Her heart was a battleground of hope and fear. She wanted to believe in this opportunity, to trust that it could be the answer to their struggles. But what if it wasn't? What if leaving the village for this adventure meant abandoning her grandparents when they needed her the most? "Morning, darling." Eleanor's soft voice broke Sophia's reverie. Her grandmother shuffled into the kitchen, leaning heavily on her cane. Despite her frailty, the warmth in her presence always made Sophia feel at home. "Good morning, Grandma. I made your favorite, oatmeal with honey," Sophia said, setting a bowl on the table. As they ate, Eleanor studied her granddaughter with an intuitive gaze. "You're quiet this morning," she said gently. "Something's on your mind." Sophia hesitated. She had hoped to spare her grandmother the worry, at least for now. But Eleanor had a way of knowing when something was amiss. Taking a deep breath, Sophia decided to share. She explained the expedition, the promise of life-changing money, and the risks involved. Eleanor listened intently, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When Sophia finished, the older woman reached out and placed a hand over hers. "You've always been so brave, Sophia," she said, trembling slightly. "But bravery isn't just about facing danger. It's about following your convictions, even when the path is uncertain." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. "I just don't want to fail you and Grandpa. What if this doesn't work out?" "You've never failed us," Eleanor said firmly. "No matter what happens, you'll always have a home here. And we'll always be proud of you." Her grandmother's words gave Sophia the clarity she needed. It was time to take a leap of faith, not just for her family, but for herself. She resolved to join the expedition, though the thought still filled her with excitement and dread. As the day unfolded, Sophia shared her decision with her grandfather, who nodded approvingly. "You've got the grit to do this, Sophia. Just promise me one thing. Don't lose sight of who you are." The weekend passed quickly, filled with preparations and quiet moments with her grandparents. Sophia packed lightly for the trip, taking only essentials and leaving behind sentimental items that might weigh her physically and emotionally. She folded her clothes into a worn duffel bag and looked around her childhood bedroom. The faded wallpaper, the bookshelves crammed with secondhand novels, and the small desk where she had once dreamed of a brighter future felt like a bittersweet farewell. On Sunday evening, Luke arrived to pick her up. His battered pickup truck sputtered to a halt outside the house, and he jumped out with his characteristic grin. "You ready, Soph?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Sophia gave a small smile. "As ready as I'll ever be." Her grandparents walked her to the truck, each step slow and deliberate. Thomas clapped Luke on the shoulder. "Take care of her, will you?" "Always, Mr. Brown," Luke replied, his tone more serious than usual. Sophia hugged her grandparents tightly and whispered, "I'll come back. I promise." Eleanor pressed a small medallion into her hand, a simple token she had carried for years. "For luck," she said softly. "And remember, you're stronger than you think." The drive to the city was quiet, with Sophia lost in her thoughts and Luke focusing on the road. When they reached the meeting point, a sleek, modern office building, Sophia's nerves began to creep in. A small crowd had already gathered, a mix of eager adventurers and seasoned professionals. Luke nudged her gently. "You've got this," he said. Inside, Sophia met the expedition organizer, a charismatic man named Jack Weston. He exuded confidence, his sharp blue eyes scanning the room as he outlined the trip's details. Jack was no ordinary organizer. His wealth and reputation preceded him, though he carried himself with surprising humility. The expedition would take them deep into the wilderness, exploring uncharted terrain and documenting the flora and fauna of the region. It was a challenging route, requiring both physical endurance and mental resilience. Sophia found herself captivated by Jack's vision, though her skepticism lingered. With his polished demeanor, could this man genuinely understand the stakes for someone like her? As the meeting concluded, Jack approached Sophia. "You're Sophia Brown, right?" he asked, his tone friendly but direct. She nodded, surprised that he knew her name. "Yes. Is there a problem?" "Not at all," Jack said with a smile. "I've read your application. You're exactly the kind of person we need on this team. Determined, resourceful, and unafraid of hard work." Sophia wasn't sure how to respond. Compliments weren't something she was used to, especially from someone like Jack. She simply said, "Thank you. I hope I don't disappoint." Jack's smile widened. "I have a feeling you won't." The first step of her journey had begun, and as Sophia left the office that evening, a new sense of determination settled over her. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but she felt like she was stepping into a future she could control for the first time in years. The morning of the expedition arrived faster than Sophia expected. A shuttle bus, decorated with the expedition's logo, landed at the edge of a busy parking lot. As Sophia approached, Her nerves flared. This was it, the point of no return. Luke nudged her with a grin. Come on, sophomore. You're not going to back out now, are you? She shook her head firmly, but the butterflies in her stomach refused to settle. As they boarded the bus, Sophia sat by the window, scanning the faces of her new teammates. They were a mixed group. Some looked seasoned, their expressions calm and focused, while others seemed as anxious as she felt. One by one, Jack Weston introduced the team members. There was Naomi, a 28-year-old single mother and former gymnast with a sharp sense of humor. She quickly earned the nickname Slinky for her ability to move with cat-like agility. Then came Oliver, a shy but muscular ex-athlete with a knack for rowing and a surprising talent for mathematics. Jack's confident tone made it clear he had carefully chosen each person for their unique skills. In Jack's speech, Sophia caught glimpses of her description. Sophia Brown, resilient and resourceful. Her background in survival training and her work ethic are exactly what we need for this trip. She felt a mixture of pride and pressure, realizing she wasn't here by chance. She had been selected because Jack believed in her. Then there was Lucas, a soft-spoken man with glasses who admitted he was joining the expedition because his wife insisted he bring home a paycheck. Despite his lack of outdoor experience, Lucas's undeniable charm made the group laugh. Finally, there was Sergei, a boisterous man with a thick accent and a tendency to crack jokes. He was the loudest in the group, his infectious and exhausting energy. As Jack continued, Sophia couldn't help but notice how his presence filled the room. Or, in this case, the bus. He had a way of making people feel at ease while also demanding their best. His sharp wit and keen observations made it clear he wasn't just another wealthy adventurer. Jack Weston was someone who thrived on challenges and thrived on pushing others to meet them. The bus began its journey to the expedition's base camp, deep in a forested region on the city's outskirts. As the group settled in, conversations began to flow. Sophia found herself sitting next to Naomi, whose bubbly personality starkly contrasted with her reserved demeanor. So, Naomi said, nudging Sophia playfully, "What made you sign up for this crazy adventure?" Sophia hesitated. "I needed the money," she admitted honestly. "My grandparents are my world, and this could change everything for them." Naomi smiled knowingly. "You're not the only one with a family to fight for. My little boy, Sam, is my everything. This money, it's a chance to give him the life he deserves." Sophia felt an instant connection with Naomi. Though their lives were different, their motivations were strikingly similar. As the bus rumbled on, Sophia realized she wasn't just part of a team. She was part of a group of people who, like her, had something to prove and fight for. Base camp was nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, the air crisp with the scent of earth and wood. The team stepped off the bus and began unloading their gear. Each person was assigned a tent and a spot by the communal fire pit. Jack gathered the group for a briefing, standing before a large map pinned to a makeshift board. "This," he said, gesturing to the map, "is where the rail work begins. Over the next 3 weeks, we'll navigate uncharted terrain, document wildlife, and map a route that could pave the way for future explorations. This isn't a vacation. It's going to be grueling, and it's going to test every one of you. But the rewards will be worth it if you give it everything." Sophia listened intently, her apprehension mingling with excitement. She had grown up watching her grandfather plan his carpentry projects with meticulous care, and Jack's approach reminded her of that same focus and determination. As the first day unfolded, the team dove into training. They practiced setting up and breaking down camp, navigating with compasses and GPS devices, and learning safety protocols for the wilderness. Sophia surprised herself with how quickly she adapted. Years of balancing multiple responsibilities had honed her ability to stay calm under pressure, and she took on a leadership role in her group. By evening, the team sat around the fire, exhaustion settling over them like a heavy blanket. Naomi joked about her sore muscles, earning laughter from everyone. Even Oliver, who rarely spoke, chimed in with a dry remark that had the group in stitches. As the fire crackled, Jack stood up and raised a mug of coffee. "Here's to the start of something extraordinary," he said. "Thank you for your courage, resilience, and willingness to enter the unknown. This journey isn't just about the destination. It's about what we discover about ourselves along the way. The team raised their mugs, a shared purpose uniting them. Later that night, as Sophia lay in her tent, she reflected on Jack's words. This journey wasn't just about the money. It was about proving to herself that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of excitement for what lay ahead and for the person she was becoming. The first few days in the wilderness tested my perseverance. The group trekked through dense forests, their boots crunching over fallen leaves and twigs. The air was heavy with the earthy scent of moss and damp soil, and the sunlight barely filtered through the thick canopy above. Every step was a reminder of the immense challenge ahead. Sophia was in awe of the raw beauty around her. Towering trees, hidden streams, and the occasional rustle of wildlife. But the physical demands were relentless. Each team member carried heavy backpacks loaded with supplies, their progress slowed by uneven terrain and the need to navigate obstacles like fallen logs and muddy inclines. Jack Weston proved to be more than just a leader. He was a driving force. He moved with quiet confidence, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings for potential hazards. When Naomi struggled to climb a steep slope, Jack was the first to extend a hand. When Oliver's canoe capsized in a fast-moving stream, Jack dove in without hesitation to help him recover the boat and their supplies. Sophia couldn't help but notice Jack's ability to inspire the team. His actions weren't just about leading. They were about building trust. And yet, there was a guardedness to him, a hint of something he wasn't ready to share. Late one afternoon, the group reached a narrow river they needed to cross. Jack instructed everyone to secure their gear tightly before boarding the canoes. As they paddled through the rushing waters, the current became more muscular, pulling the boats in different directions. Sophia's heart raced as her canoe wobbled precariously, but she steadied herself, recalling the paddling techniques they'd practiced at base camp. Then, disaster struck. One of the canoes, carrying Naomi and Lucas, hit a hidden rock and began to take on water. The team quickly sprang into action. Jack shouted instructions, his voice cutting through the chaos. Sophia paddled toward the struggling canoe, adrenaline fueling her every move. Without hesitation, she leaned over and grabbed Naomi's arm, pulling her into her boat just as the damaged canoe sank. When they finally reached the riverbank, everyone was soaked and shivering. But there was no time for rest. They needed to set up camp before nightfall. The team worked together, their earlier panic replaced by camaraderie. As they sat around the fire that evening, Naomi turned to Sophia and said, "You saved me today. I won't forget that." Sophia brushed off the comment, but deep down, she felt a quiet sense of pride. She was proving, not just to the team but to herself, that she belonged here. The days stretched into weeks, each one bringing new challenges and triumphs. The group faced torrential rains that turned the trails into slippery quagmires and scorching heat that drained their energy. They navigated treacherous cliffs, charted unmarked paths, and documented rare species of plants and animals. Each obstacle tested their limits, but it also brought them closer together. Sophia found herself forming bonds she hadn't expected. Naomi's humor and resilience became a source of strength for the team, while Oliver's quiet determination and depth of knowledge surprised everyone. Even Lucas, who initially seemed out of his element, proved his worth by using his culinary skills to create meals that lifted the group's spirits after long days of trekking. But it was Jack who continued to intrigue Sophia the most. He seemed to carry the weight of the expedition on his shoulders, constantly pushing himself harder than anyone else. Yet, in quiet moments around the campfire, he revealed glimpses of the man behind the leader, a man with a deep respect for nature and an unspoken yearning for something more. One evening, after a grueling hike, Jack sat beside Sophia by the fire. The others were either asleep or tending to their gear, leaving the two of them in rare solitude. "You've surprised me, Sophia," Jack said, his voice low but warm. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." Sophia looked at him, startled. "I didn't think you noticed." Jack chuckled softly. "I notice everything. It's part of the job. But with you, it's different. You don't just endure. You lead. You don't let it stop you even when you're scared." Sophia felt her cheeks flush. She wasn't used to receiving praise, especially from someone like Jack. I guess I've had to be strong, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For my grandparents. For myself. Jack's gaze softened. That kind of strength doesn't just happen. It's earned. They sat silently for a moment, the crackling fire filling the space between them. Then Jack said something that caught Sophia off guard. You remind me of someone I knew once. Someone who taught me how to keep fighting, no matter what. Before she could ask who, Jack stood and walked away, leaving her with more questions than answers. The following morning, the group began preparing for the final leg of their journey, an ascent into the mountainous northern region. The terrain ahead promised to be the most challenging yet, but it also held the most significant rewards. As they packed their gear, Jack gathered the team for a final briefing. This is it, he said, his voice steady but charged with emotion. The hardest part of the journey, but I believe in every single one of you. We've come this far together, and we'll finish together. Sophia felt a surge of determination. She wasn't just doing this for the money anymore. She was doing it for her grandparents, teammates, and the person she was becoming. The sun rose over the mountains as the group set off, casting a golden glow over the landscape. It was a new day, and with it came the promise of discovery, both of the world around them and of themselves. The climb into the northern mountains was grueling from the very start. The forested trails gave way to rocky paths, the air thinning as the group ascended higher and higher. Every step tested their endurance, and every decision demanded careful thought. Mist swirled around them, hiding the peaks they were determined to reach. Sophia pressed on, her breath coming in labored gasps. Her legs burned with every step, but she refused to slow down. Jack led the way, his movements precise and confident. He was tireless, pausing only to help others navigate difficult sections of the trail or to check their coordinates. Despite his composure, Sophia noticed something in his expression, a mixture of resolve and concern. The team's first challenge came when they reached a narrow ledge carved into the side of the mountain. The drop below was dizzying, rushing water echoing from the gorge below. Jack stopped and turned to face the group. This is the trickiest part of the route, he said, his voice steady but serious. Take it slow and trust your gear. We've got each other. Sophia felt her stomach twist as she stepped onto the ledge. The rock was slippery from recent rain, and the gusts of wind threatened to unbalance her. She focused on placing one foot in front of the other, gripping the guide rope tightly. Behind her, Lucas hesitated. I don't think I can do this, he stammered, his face pale. Naomi, who was directly in front of him, turned and reached out a hand. You've got this, Lucas, she said, her voice firm. One step at a time. Encouraged by Naomi's words, Lucas began to move, though his steps were shaky. Jack, watching from the front, climbed back to help. Lucas safely made it across the ledge with his guidance, collapsing onto the solid ground on the other side. The team erupted into cheers, the tension breaking as Lucas managed a weak smile. See? We're all in this together, Jack said, clapping him on the shoulder. Sophia couldn't help but marvel at Jack's leadership. He wasn't just guiding them. He was instilling a sense of unity that kept them moving forward. When they reached a plateau where they could set up camp, the sun sank behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The group worked quickly to pitch their tents and prepare a fire. Exhaustion weighed heavily on them, but the sense of accomplishment was undeniable. As they gathered around the fire, Jack pulled out a weathered notebook and began sketching their route that day. The firelight danced across his face, highlighting the sharp lines of his jaw and the intensity in his eyes. What's in that notebook? Sophia asked, curiosity getting the better of her. Jack looked up, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It's my way of making sense of all this, he said. The terrain, the challenges we've faced, it's all part of the story. One day, maybe it'll help someone else navigate this route. Sophia nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind his words. Jack wasn't just documenting their journey, but preserving the lessons they had learned together. As the others drifted off to sleep that night, Sophia could not rest. She stepped out of her tent and gazed at the star-filled sky, its vastness making her feel small and infinite. The crunch of boots on gravel startled her, and she turned to see Jack approaching. Can't sleep? He asked, his tone gentle. Sophia shook her head. Too much on my mind. Jack leaned against a nearby rock, his hands in his pockets. It's moments like this that remind me why I do this, he said, his voice soft. Out here, away from everything, you see the world as it is. No noise, no distractions. Just clarity. Sophia looked at him, sensing that there was more he wanted to say. Is that why you started these expeditions? To find clarity? Jack hesitated, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Partly, he admitted, but it's also about proving something. To myself, mostly, that I'm capable of more than the life I left behind. Sophia's curiosity deepened. What life was that? Jack met her eyes, his expression unreadable. A life that wasn't mine, he said simply. But that's a story for another time. Sophia felt frustrated at his vagueness, but she also understood. Everyone carried their scars, and not all were ready to be shared. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that Jack's past was a key piece of the puzzle that made him the man he is today. As they stood silently under the stars, Sophia realized how much this journey had already changed her. She had faced fears she never thought she could conquer and forged unbreakable bonds. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, she felt ready for whatever came next. The final stretch of the expedition brought the group to the heart of the northern mountains, a vast, pristine valley flanked by jagged peaks and dotted with sparkling lakes. It was a sight none of them would ever forget. The air was thinner here, every breath a conscious effort, but the beauty of their surroundings made the struggle worthwhile. Sophia felt pride as the team stood together, gazing over the valley. They had done it, and weeks of grueling effort, near misses, and unshakable determination led them to this moment. Even Lucas, who had doubted himself every step of the way, smiled as he looked over the landscape. Jack gathered the group for a debrief as they set up their final camp. His voice carried a mix of pride and gravity. We've mapped a route that no one else has ever seen. We've documented species that most people will never get to witness. What we've accomplished here is extraordinary. Sophia couldn't help but feel that his words were meant for her. She had grown more in these few weeks than in years, discovering strength she hadn't known she possessed. But she also sensed that the journey wasn't quite over. Something about how Jack looked at her like he had more to say kept her on edge. Jack finally opened up that night as they shared a final meal around the fire. I haven't been frank with all of you, he began, his tone measured but sincere. The group fell silent, their attention riveted. I'm not just the organizer of this expedition, Jack said, meeting their eyes individually. I'm also its sponsor. The team stared at him in shock. Jack explained that he had funded the journey, driven by a personal mission to explore uncharted territories and inspire others to do the same. But he didn't expect how deeply the people he brought along would affect him. When I started this, he continued, I thought it would be about the destination, about conquering the wilderness. But what I've learned is that it's the people you share the journey with who matter most. As he said this, his gaze lingered on Sophia, and she felt her heart skip. Jack's words weren't just about the expedition. They were about something more. The expedition ended with a triumphant return to the base camp, where the team was greeted with applause and congratulations. They had achieved something remarkable. Each knew they would never be the same. As the group packed up and prepared to leave, Jack approached Sophia. Can we talk? He asked, his voice quieter than usual. Sophia nodded, following him to a secluded spot overlooking the mountains. The air was cool and still, the kind of quiet that demanded honesty. I've been thinking a lot about what comes next, Jack said, his expression serious. For the expedition, for the team, for me. Sophia felt a lump form in her throat. And what do you want? Jack hesitated, then smiled. I want to keep doing this, to keep exploring, building teams, creating opportunities. But I also want to do it with someone who makes it all worthwhile. Sophia's breath caught as Jack stepped closer. Sophia, I've seen how strong you are, how fearless. I've seen the way you inspire others, the way you've inspired me. I don't want this to end our journey together. Tears filled Sophia's eyes as she realized the depth of Jack's words. She had spent so long focusing on others, on her grandparents, on surviving, that she hadn't allowed herself to hope for something more. But here was Jack, offering her a partnership and a future. "I don't know what's next for me either," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But I know I don't want to do it alone." Jack reached for her hand, and in that moment, the uncertainty that had defined so much of Sophia's life melted away. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't just fighting to survive, she was living. Sophia returned to her village a week later, her heart full and her mind brimming with possibilities. Her grandparents were overjoyed to see her, their faces lighting up as she shared stories from the expedition. When she told them about Jack, Eleanor gave her a knowing smile. "I always knew you'd find someone who saw how special you are," she said, squeezing Sophia's hand. But Sophia knew her journey wasn't just about romance. It was about building a life that honored the sacrifices her grandparents had made for her. With the money she earned from the expedition, she paid off their debts, fixed their home, and set aside enough to ensure Eleanor's medical needs were met. Jack visited the village soon after, bringing with him a proposal, not just for Sophia but for the entire community. He wanted to fund a program to teach wilderness skills and environmental conservation, using the lessons from their expedition to inspire others. The village would become a hub for exploration and education, where people could connect with nature and each other. Sophia stood by Jack's side as he presented his vision, her heart swelling with pride. Together, they weren't just building a life, they were creating a legacy. As the sun set over the village, casting a golden glow over the mountains in the distance, Sophia realized something profound. Her journey had started with a simple desire to help her family, but it had led her to something much more significant, a life filled with purpose, love, and the promise of endless discovery. And so, with Jack's hand in hers and the support of her loved ones, Sophia stepped boldly into her future, ready to face whatever came next.